Hi, thanks for watching. In this video, I'm going to cover two bits of the crime and punishment topic. So this is theme E. We're going to look at aims of punishment and attitudes to suffering from the point of view of Christianity and Islam. So let's go. First of all, before I get into this, actually, it's really important to distinguish between the aims of punishment and types of punishment. So when we're talking about types of punishment, we mean things like prison, community service, fines, maybe even the death penalty, but types of punishment are what the punishment actually is. Aims of punishment is a little bit different than that. Aims of punishment is about what are you trying to achieve by punishing the wrongdoer or the criminal. So there are three that you need to know for the exam. Retribution. Now, retribution is simply put revenge, payback for what the criminal has done, trying to pay them back in kind for what they've done wrong. So we'll do some examples of that in a little bit. Then we've got deterrence. This is about putting other people off committing the crime by making maybe an example of the criminal and putting the criminal off from reoffending. So deterrence is about making sure that the criminal doesn't want to do it again, and it's sending a message to other people to try and put them off committing crime. And then finally, reformation. Sometimes we hear words like rehabilitation attached to this, but reformation comes from reform. So it's about helping the criminal reform their character so that they don't reoffend and can go back into society perhaps and make a more positive contribution. So it's about trying to change the person for the better. So let's look at them all in more depth. Retribution. Now, in the book of Exodus, in the Old Testament of the Bible, we have the teaching an eye for an eye. That's about retribution. But Christians tend to be quite split on how that should be applied. So some do think that an eye for an eye, as it says in the Bible, is absolutely fair enough because it's paying somebody back to the same extent that they have done wrong. So the reason there's a split is that a lot of Christians think that this may satisfy a need for revenge, which is totally understandable, but ultimately it doesn't do anything to heal people, and it can just be responding to hate with hate, violence with violence. Some Christians are quite uncomfortable with that. This is why many Christians don't support the death penalty, but equally many do. And remember, it isn't just about the death penalty, although it certainly does come into play when we're talking about the death penalty. If we look at Islam, Islam teaches a very similar thing. It is acceptable to take a life for a life. That's in the Quran. So in principle, retribution is not a problem. It's supported as a principle of justice. But, and again, this is particularly pertinent to the death penalty, families of victims have the option to show mercy to the offender. And this is thought to reflect well on them because they're doing a good deed, they're showing mercy. And doing that is believed to attract many blessings from Allah. So even though it's there as a principle, that doesn't mean that you have to use it. You can take perhaps a more merciful route, and that's a good thing if you do. Okay, deterrence. Christians are generally okay. They generally agree with the principle that punishments need to be harsh enough to deter others from committing crime, but only up to a point, because some punishments that are a deterrent are very, very public, very kind of making an example of people. So in certain countries, you can be lashed, you can be beaten, public executions were a thing for a long time. Christians tend to be quite uncomfortable with this because they shame and harm and humiliate criminals. Now you might think, well, yeah, but that's where the effect comes from. But it's not very compatible with the teachings of Jesus, because Christians believe, following the teachings of Jesus, that all human beings should be treated with dignity. Now you will find some Christians who are in favour of very harsh punishments as a deterrent, but again, there's a bit of difference there, there's a bit of discomfort. Islam, again, a little bit different, allows for punishments to be carried out in public in certain Islamic countries, not in the UK. some countries such as Saudi Arabia and Iran allow public beatings. This is supposed to act as a deterrent to others. It's very often done for crimes that are specifically forbidden in the Quran. So the argument is that if you know what the Quran says and you break those laws, you haven't got a leg to stand on and you deserve a harsh punishment. Some Muslims approve of this. They're like, yeah, that's the principle of justice in the Quran. Others not so much. They may think that deterrents don't always work because the reasons why people commit crimes can be very complex. And if you've looked at that at all, you'll know that that's true. There can be many, many reasons why people commit crimes. And you might even go so far as to say that not all criminals are 100% to blame for what they do. But it depends what they've done and it depends who you ask. Okay, Reformation. Christianity and Islam both see the value because this is to do with forgiveness. Within this process, forgiveness becomes possible. A person can change, be better, make a positive contribution. And we've got a bit from St. Paul here. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's quite influential on many Christians. They take this to mean that if you respond to wrongdoing and to crime with kindness, understanding, the possibility of forgiveness, an opportunity to improve, that's more powerful than simply punishing. If you just punish someone with no kind of opportunity for them to be better, they won't get better. They will just continue to commit crime because it may be all they know. In Islam as well, forgiveness is very important, forgiveness from God and from other people. But Reformation has a role to play here because it's far easier to forgive someone who can show that they've changed for the better. So many Muslims do work with criminals to try and change them for the better. So a little example of Reformation that it would be good for you to go ahead and look up, and you can get this on YouTube. There's something called the Clink, which is an initiative run by various prisons in the UK. It started in just one prison, but now it's expanded a lot. And it's where prisons open restaurants. And anyone can book and go to the restaurant. And the cooking and the front of house staff and the waiting staff are nearly all prisoners who are serving a sentence. Now, it won't work for everybody, but for the people it does work for, it gives them back some self-esteem, it gives them some skills, it gives them some confidence, and it gives them a possibility of getting a job once they leave prison. So this is a really good example of Reformation that you could probably talk about, and it has been very, very successful. The reoffending rates of people who've been through this programme have been shown to be really pretty low, which is evidence that it works. So the second part of what I want to talk about is beliefs about suffering. So I'll just take you through some Christian beliefs, then some Islamic beliefs, then we'll wrap it up. So Christians see suffering as a reality, it's part of life. But Jesus' suffering on the cross, and that was real, terrible human suffering that he went through, shows that God understands human suffering. Jesus, during his time on earth, helped those who suffered. He made a point of reaching out to them. And Christians feel that they should do the same. They should follow his examples. Many of the parables, if you think about it, are about helping people who are suffering. Lots of it is caused by abuse of free will, but we can't really do without free will in Christian thinking. It's a gift from God. It's what makes our lives meaningful. It's what makes our choices mean something. So many Christians accept that, yeah, suffering is terrible, but it's the price we have to pay. And the other thing Christians do is they try to make amends if they cause suffering to others. An example of this could be in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before Jesus was arrested. He healed the soldier who was attacked by Peter. Peter's instinct was to lash out, but this example of Jesus shows that lashing out at others doesn't get you anywhere. Causing people to suffer because you have some sort of beef with them is wrong, and it's not Christian. Okay, so finally, Muslim beliefs about suffering. There's a very strong sense within Islam that suffering is a test. It's a test from God, it's a test of your resolve, it's a test of your faith. But there's also a belief that God does not give you more suffering than you can endure. So even if your suffering feels awful, Muslims trust that there is a plan and there is the love of God behind it. Temptation is very important. Muslims tend to believe in the devil. Not all Muslims do, but many do. Falling into temptation causes people to suffer. That's on you. That's your own fault if you do that, because that's what the devil is there for, to tempt people away. Like Christians, Muslims also tend to believe in free will. Some Muslims do believe in predestination in the sense that Allah knows everything that will happen, but that doesn't mean that we don't have free will. And the best way to get through suffering and to deal with your suffering is to submit to God's will, to kind of surrender yourself to the will of God and believe that this is his plan. Muslims believe that it's obviously wrong to make others suffer, but that God is very merciful and God will forgive people who sincerely repent. And a good example of that is in the story of the prophet Adam. He gives into temptation, but he's sorry for this and he's forgiven. So there's always a sense that people aren't written off. People can always find a way back to goodness and a way back to God. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. I'll be back soon with some more bits of the GCSE spec. If there are any bits you'd specifically like me to do a video on, I'm open to that. So drop a comment if that's the case. Thanks for watching and I'll see you soon.